Today I'm going to make a 6-in-1 jig for your trim router. This jig can handle fine detail work, inlays, trimming, edge banding, mortises, and grooves. It also has an extension fence where you can cut circles, big or small. This jig is going to be really easy to make because I already prepared a template on the computer for you guys. You could download this on my website, and all you're going to need to do is follow the lines here. The easiest way that I found possible to tape up templates is to do it on a window. This way you can clearly see the colors coming through on the other side, and it's really easy to line everything up. Now I could just cut the template out using a straight edge. I want to try to keep this cut as straight as I possibly can. Now, the material I'm going to use is a 1/4-inch thick acrylic, and I tried my hardest to fit this whole jig on a 12 by 12 piece for the template, but I just couldn't do it. It just wouldn't have as much functionality in it. So this is a 12 by 24 piece of 1/4-inch thick acrylic. I used some spray adhesive to attach the template and tried my best to line up the edges. So it appears that this piece of acrylic is slightly undersized. My template was 12 inches, and this acrylic is about 1/8 under. Should have listened to the Amazon reviews that said that it was undersized, but we'll just make it work. Before moving on to any cutting, the first thing that I want to do is take an awl, and I'm just going to mark in all the crosshairs. And that way, when it comes to drilling, it's going to be really accurate. And don't worry about writing down all these steps. It's all written out very clearly in the plans that are available with the template on my website. Time to start cutting. So I designed this jig so that you only need a trim router to make it. Well, I guess a table saw also, or a circular saw, but mainly you only need a trim router. And I'm assuming that you have one or you're planning on getting one because this jig is meant for only using with a trim router. You can make this on the router table and it's going to be way easier, but I guess I'm just making my life difficult to show you how to make this with only a trim router. Another key thing you're going to need here is some sort of straight edge. So I like to use this jig that I made. It's really easy and simple to make. Not necessary to make this jig, but it will definitely make your life easier, and you can make this in about 10 minutes. The first step is on these pieces that are marked D and E. All I'm going to do is I'm going to score these crosshairs going across everything with a V-groove bit, and that's going to help with the aligning when I use this for the circle cutting jig. Line my router jig up onto those lines, clamp this into place, lift up the flap, and now the router bit is set really, really shallow, so it's only going to make a tiny little score in there. Now I'll just repeat the same process on the lines going in this direction. A good way to check if your straight edge is in the right spot is to take the V-groove bit and just line it up on the other crosshairs that are on that, there we go, on the jig there. And if the tip of the bit lines up with the crosshairs, both in the front and back, then you are good to go. You want these cuts to go just beyond the edge of the piece, like into the gray cut lines. Before doing the rest of the routing, I'll drill all the through holes now. Parts D, E, and F get an 1/8 inch through hole that are going to go through the center. While I'm at it, I might as well drill some holes over here. This is where the handles for the main part of the base are going to go, and I'm going to need to countersink these holes. So it's going to be easier to drill a through hole now so that I could do the whole countersinking situation later. All of the yellow parts on the template mean that it's a 1/4 inch wide hole. So there's a few spots here, like on this A piece and on this G piece, where it's just a hole and it's not a slot, so it doesn't need to be routed. So right now I'll drill that 1/4 inch hole into those spots. Oh, wait, Oh, I wasn't supposed to drill that out yet. Okay. So I mentioned before that I drilled an 1/8 inch hole in this spot to help with countersinking. And I meant to countersink these first and then drill that 1/4 inch through hole. All right, so I'm making this mistake so you don't have to. All of that's going to be noted in the plans. Don't worry. All right, now comes the fun part. So again, I'm going to take that straight edge jig that I have and I'm going to line it up on all of those yellow marks because that's those 1/4 inch lines. And I'll use a 1/4 inch bit in my router and I'll just plunge all the way through. And I'm using this piece of MDF underneath just as a backer board because I don't want to cut into my bench here. Okay, so the next step is to basically just repeat the same process, just lining it up on those marks and now cutting away at the red marks using a 1/2 inch bit. Now with the 1/2 inch bit, I'm not going to go all the way through. You just want to go as deep as the thickness of the head of the T-bolt that you're going to use. All right. Now all you need to do is cut all these pieces to size. So I made this easy once again. All of these gray lines here are the cut lines. So you can do this at the miter saw. I'm going to cut this at the table saw. Now this next part is really critical, but I couldn't put this in the plans because everybody's router is different and this isn't going to be the same for each individual router. So what you want to do is mark out the hole locations onto here so that your router is going to fit into here. The way that I came up to do this was, remember we used an awl to go into the center of the crosshairs. So you can take your trim router and put in a V-groove bit. And if your holes that attach on this bottom base plate go all the way through, you can then take that V-groove bit and put it in the center of that indent that you made with the awl, and then use either a pencil or a drill bit or something to fit into those holes, and that's going to accurately mark out where to drill for your router. Or if your holes don't go all the way through, mine, 2 of them go all the way through, but 2 of them don't. So what you could also do is take that V-groove bit, line it up where the awl was. The router is off and there's no battery now, by the way. So now that that's in the center, you could just take a pencil and mark around it. Now you take the base plate and line it up with all those marks that you just made, and then you can accurately mark out where to drill those 4 holes. And drilling these out is going to be a 3-step process. First, go all the way through with a very small, like 1/8 inch bit. Now drill a recessed hole with a Forstner bit using this hole as a guide. And make sure you're making these holes on the top of the template, like where you routed all of those lines, those red lines. Now while I'm over here, I'm also going to use that same Forstner bit to recess these holes for the handles. This was that mistake that I made earlier. I made that hole, the final hole, where I should have first done the recess and then done the final hole. This makes it easier to align the Forstner bit. See, this first one's going to be really well aligned. The second one that I messed up probably won't be so good. Wasn't too bad, but it could have been better. Now finally, the last step in the process, drill all the way through those holes, and using that 1/8 inch hole as a guide, these are going to come out really centered. Nice. One last step before we can use it, to drill out the center hole for the router bits. So I'm going to use an 1¼ inch bit here, but use whatever you have and whatever fits the router bits that you plan on using with this jig. All right, time to peel all the templates off. All right, now let's see how this works.
Mom,
What?
what's for dinner?
What is for dinner? Between woodworking, editing these videos, drawing up all these plans and templates, being a mom, dealing with virtual school, and everything else going on in my life, I am so happy that meal kit delivery services like HelloFresh exist. Here's why. It takes 20 minutes round trip for me to get to my local supermarket. Then I spend about 15 to 20 minutes inside, longer if the lines are long, so that's about 40 minutes a day where I would rather be woodworking. HelloFresh also takes some of the weight off of my shoulders because I don't have to think about what's for dinner. Chef-curated meals that can be prepared in about 30 minutes are delivered right to my door. No supermarket and no thinking. Awesome. And yes, I know it's a little ridiculous that I don't have a decent wood cutting board. What's that saying about the shoemaker's kids? Anyway, the plans are completely customizable. You can choose kits with meat, fish, or even low-calorie options. I chose the veggie kit, not because we're vegetarians, but because my kids tend to only eat meat, and I thought this was a stress-free way to introduce veggies into their diet. Each kit comes with a recipe card that's super easy to follow, and there are even some helpful tips to help you along the way if you're new to cooking. The produce that's included in all these kits is sourced directly from farmers, so you get it faster than the grocery can, which means that it's really fresh. Not only are these meals really easy to prepare, they are delicious. My picky eater actually ate asparagus. Want to try HelloFresh for yourself? Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code 3x3custom10 to get 10 free meals and free shipping. Once again, in case you missed that, it's HelloFresh.com. The code is 3x3custom10 and you'll get 10 free meals and free shipping. All right, let's see how the jig works now. The first thing to do is to attach the handles. So I'm just using these walnut dowels that I made that were actually previously on my old router jig. You guys have asked so many questions about this, and that's actually why I decided to make this new and improved one. So you could use dowel material, you can use square stock and just shape it so it feels comfortable. You can purchase handles, just whatever feels comfortable for you to hold. All right. Next up, we need to attach the router onto here. If you did this correctly, the holes should all line up. But the hole that was drilled out here, this 1/4 inch hole, is larger than these screws, so there is some wiggle room and some play in there. Make sure not to over tighten it because you don't want to crack the acrylic. The first way to use it is just like this. It's just to have more control as you're freehand routing. So I'll write something on here and I'll easily be able to follow the lines because I have more control than having to just hold this small little base here. The next feature is flush cutting inlays and dowels. So I just cut this hole in here and I'll plug it up with a dowel. I'm just going to quickly use some CA glue for time, but you would use regular wood glue for something like this. Pretend like that's like a dovetail key or some sort of inlay or the end of a dowel on joinery. So if you just try to flush cut this like this, you see it's not going to work. This needs to be lifted up and raised a little bit so that it can ride along the wood and flush cut that. That's where all of these attachments come into play. So for something like this, you have options. You can just use the rectangular pieces and attach them to the bottom, and that will lift up the whole thing enough so that it has some clearance. But I also made this larger base plate that has more surface area and it will be more stable. It also has this point in it so that you can get into some tight corners if you need to. So I'm going to put one of these on the side here, and I'll take just another rectangle and just put it on the edge over here just to keep it a little bit balanced. The T-bolts go underneath, and they fit into the slots that were routed out. Some washers go on the T-bolts. And then those base pieces get locked in with these knobs. To set the bit height for this, I would take a piece of paper and I would put it right under the bit and then lower the bit. And now that I know that it's set so that it will cut this flush, but it won't dig into the plywood. Okay, so that's pretty awesome. It did not mar the plywood at all, and it's super flush. Awesome. The next feature is going to be to flush up some hardwood edge banding. And for this one, you're going to need all 3 of the rectangles. You're also probably going to need longer T-bolts. The first 2 rectangles get stacked together. This is actually going to be a little bit easier because later on when I show you the circle cutting jig, there's going to be a little pin that's going to be permanently affixed in one of these. So you just put it into the hole of the other one. And the third rectangle is going to sit slightly proud, and you could adjust that one closer to the bit or further away from the bit depending on the thickness of the edge banding that you're using. And this large base stays on as well, except I'll flip it around so that the wider part of it is closer to the bit. This is just going to make it more stable. For demonstration purposes, I'm using a small piece here, so I'm just going to double stick tape it to my workbench, but for a normal use, you would clamp it in a normal way. Now to set it up, you place the router on the workpiece where the router bit is right over where the edge banding is. And then you adjust these fences that are on this side so that the top 2 are inset a little bit, but the bottom one over here is touching the edge of the plywood. Now you lower the bit the same way that you did before by using the piece of paper. And now just run the router along the hardwood edge banding and it completely flushes it up against the plywood. The next way is just an easy way to make repetitive slots or mortises or anything just by putting a stop, like an edge guide on the edge. For this, you can use any one of these parts. You can use these pieces. You can use this one if you'd like. You can also use these longer pieces and put those on the base like that, and it will have a long reference for following along on a piece. To show this though, I'm just going to use one of the rectangles and put it in. And just a note here, you see that everything that I'm doing now, I'm referencing off of the pieces that are on the jig. So even if you messed up in making the jig, like you didn't cut these pieces the right size, or the slots are in the wrong places, well, it has to be sort of in the right place, but they're a little bit off, it doesn't matter because everything, you're just setting it up based on the dimensions that you cut it. So you're good. Like, don't worry about it being 100% perfect. All right, so now this piece underneath here is going to act as the edge guide to run along on my workpiece. So that works out really great. But what if you want to use an edge guide for a piece that's longer and wider? That's where these extension pieces come into play. Basically, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to extend this base. So these extension bars allow you to do that. So you take one of the rectangle pieces and you put them underneath the extension pieces, but then in order for it to be an edge guide, you have to add another one of the rectangles. So to do this process, you just need two rectangles and the extension pieces. Now these could extend in and out, and you could place them wherever you need to. And now I'll add the two rectangle pieces underneath here. Now this base is extended. Awesome. So for this cut, it actually felt more comfortable to hold the router and not the handles. And as far as the maximum width that you could do with this, that's about 14.5 inches from the edge. I think that's more than enough. The last feature is the circle cutting feature, and I'm going to be able to do that by gluing in a pin into one of the holes in one of the rectangle pieces. I'm using a brass pin here because that's what I have, but any sort of pin that you can find would work fine. Now there's two ways that you're going to be able to cut a circle with this. One with drilling a pilot hole into your workpiece and one without. I will show the first one first. So first you just attach this onto the base. You can also use the extension arms if you want a bigger circle. But for now, I'm just going to show you this one. I'm also going to attach the wide base onto the other side for stability. Now, if I want to make a 4-inch hole, I would just line up a ruler with the edge of a router bit and adjust this side piece that has the pin in it to that measurement. Now you would drill a center pilot hole in your workpiece, put the brass pin in the hole, turn on the router, plunge it down, and then route out your circle. Easy enough. But what if you don't want to drill a hole in the center of your workpiece? That's what this center circle cutting jig base is for, and that's why I drilled a hole in it. Want to see how this works? For this one, I'll show you how to do it with the extension arms so that you can make larger circles with your trim router. So you're going to need the piece that has the pin in it for the circle cutting. And this basically acts as the base extension, and it's also going to be the pivot point. But you also still need to have this, this other larger base on the other side. Now let's say I want to make a 9-inch circle. You could go bigger than that, but let's just do 9-inch for fun. Now I'll find the center of the board by going corner to corner. And now I can use the crosshairs on this other piece and line it up on those lines to get the center of this board. These crosshairs aren't going to be like the same shape as this if this is not a square, but you can still see where the center is. I'll put some double-sided tape onto it. Ooh. Now the pin in here is going to fit into that hole. And now just use it like a regular circle cutting jig. So obviously I didn't use a piece that was big enough, but you get the point. This just pops right out, and then you can remove this center piece and you don't have to drill a hole in the center of your workpiece. So that's basically it. I think I managed to pack a lot of features into this small little jig, and I'm kind of excited about it. Just a couple of things to note. After gluing in this brass pin, it's not going to get in the way of any of the other features because of all the holes that were drilled in the center of all these pieces. It just locks right into there, and it never will get in the way. So that's it for this one. Thank you so much to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Dinner is done. The dishes are done, man. Name that movie.